但是差2点，
也有可能他2点才开始。清楚，清楚。刚才的，现在这个是我讲话，声音有。这样子是我，你觉得这种就是他们收，因为这样子，可是现在收音跟刚刚是一样的。
收一点不好，所以它那个贴到声音是很杂出，贴到我现在是太近，
太近了吗？
就是2个电扇太近，会有那个。你是从电脑直接
对，可以，现在可以啊，因为我现在在这里比较近，就是我现在离电
可是我用不要就是太高，这边不要太
对，说那边多少一点，就这样子声音就 OK 了，是 OK 的。说的，要不要？应该搞不好。
没有买，其实买。
You don't mind. This is right. You can see. Okay, so. Yeah. 但是那个，我去上面点一下，看我大概怎么样。那个。可以试一下。Right. Release one. Why? So. Okay. So it's because I didn't see you.
走不动它。Yeah. He's very of this
Yeah, but for this, I'm going to see it. So you can do that. I'm scared. Hockey. I. But. I'm. Big one, that's all. Well, regarding scenes that are from the team. Yeah.
Okay, let's go for number two. Yes, okay, I see. Thank you. Okay, it's okay, right? Let's get them here, otherwise people will think it's. Get out the camera. Okay. Let's start. Okay, good afternoon, students. Today, it's our honor to invite a board in the class, a renowned professor in the environmental, and particularly in the chemical analysis and treatment of water area. So, Professor Shane Snyder is a chair professor of in Georgia Tech Civil Environmental Engineering School, and he is also the editor-in-chief in one of the very founder of a very important journal in our field, ES&T Water. So we're very happy to have him to share with us his experience about how to write a paper and how to get published. I think he has a lot of papers, especially in emerging countries. I think he's probably one of the most famous ones who developed a lot of the legal technology and treatment technology for emerging countries and water environments. So without further introduction, I would like to ask you to join me to welcome Professor Chen Snyder.
Well, it's great to be back again here in Thailand. This is my either third or fourth time, not quite sure. But in 2023, I was here, but I was with Nanyang Technological University of Singapore at the time. So I spent 7 years there, 6 years before that at National University of Singapore. So I'm just returning to the US just in time for exciting political debate. So today, what I want to do, I really want this to be Q&A and discussion. I don't want to give a long lecture, make you bored. I'd rather that you ask me questions. This is your time to ask me whatever you want to ask about the journals. And I want to start by saying that if you had a different editor-in-chief in the room, they may talk a little bit differently about how they handle the papers. People do things different ways, but I'll show you the American Chemical Society, how they train and teach us. And again, at any time, you don't have to wait to the end. If I see your hand, I'll take your question. So let me start by asking, how many of you have ever played an editorial role in a journal? Associate editor, editorial advisory board? Come on, I know you have. Yeah. Yes, vice board. Okay, that's good. That makes it safer. How about peer review? How many of you have done a peer review? Yeah, a few more, but not so many. Okay, so that's one of my first things I'll say. I'll come to it again. If you want a peer review for a journal, be proactive. You can write to me, you can write to the ACS. You may think, well, I'm a student, whatnot. Actually, some of the best reviews we get are from young professionals. Because old guys like me are pretty busy, so we generally tend either to not do it or we're in a hurry, not everyone, but that's some conclusion that we've seen over the years. So I'm not here to market for American Chemical Society. I actually spent most of my editor-in-chief experience with Elsevier, with Chemosphere. Maybe some of you know what happened with Chemosphere. That was after my tenure, but I will tell you, I don't know if the camera on, but I can explain to you a little bit of what happened. So you probably know, hopefully you've heard of the American Chemical Society. I've been a member of it since about 1995, so 30 years now, I've been a member. And They're not for profit. That's not to say it means they're not have their own interests in growing their portfolios, but they are not traded in the stock market. They have no shareholders. It's an organization composed of scientific professionals around the world. So they have 38 journals in Q1, according to Web of Science. They published in 2024 over 75,000 articles, and they have retracted 25 articles in 2023. And that is a growing trend. There's things that are happening. AI is getting better at picking up plagiarism, or we'll get into that. I think that's a topic. I gave this speech 3 weeks ago at Latvia. I didn't know where Latvia was until I got to take the Riga. That was the #1 discussion in the room just like this. I'm talking about AI. So again, they have various resources on the internet. I do encourage you to go look at them. And I'll admit, I didn't look at them all until more recently as I was assembling these PowerPoints, and there is a lot of good information. Maybe too much, maybe overwhelming, that's the challenge, but it's there. And by the way, my PowerPoints, I can provide them, you're welcome to distribute them. I'll delete the sensitive ones ahead of time. So how do they support it? Again, I'm not here to represent ACS, but they do have an author's lab. They have editing services that can go through and help you with your language if that's a challenge, or your figures or whatnot. So they have these services available to authors. So here's where I'll insert something you may not see. For our journal, if the paper appears that it'll be accepted, a lot of these services can be free of charge. So if we make that determination the paper is good, but maybe it's an author whose native language is in English, that's very fair. If you ask me to give a paper in a foreign language, I'm no chance at all. So I applaud those who can do that. I could not myself, but they do offer for free if your paper is looking to be accepted. So ACS on ACS Water, I'm editor-in-chief. ACS Air, ironically, Sally Ung, also from Georgia Tech, is the editor-in-chief of that journal. And ES&T Engineering is Rob Cho from South Korea. So we have another one coming out that I can't tell you much about it yet, but there'll be one more, at least one more ES&T journal. So the original journal, back when I was a student, way back then, ES&T, when I was a student for Professor John Giese at Michigan State, that was the journal we held. He held as the highest esteem. So I followed that. Ironically, my advisor was the editor-in-chief of Chemosphere at the time that I was a student. But he always told us our best data, we try to get it in ES&T. And it's not an easy journal. They reject at least 82% of all manuscripts go to ES&T, including many of my own. So I stayed away from them for a while, but I got tired of rejecting. Letters, the more short, concise, and you have to make a case that your article is urgently needed. It's really exciting data. Want to get that out into the public domain. ES&T letters is a great way to disseminate. Now, I think every publisher now has their own version of that kind of journal, not just ACS. So I'll show you a bit more. So this is something that I was reading that I think is really well done. It's not from me. I didn't write this, but I like what they did. They have written editorials. I believe they are open access. You can get a copy. So one on making waves, how do you get something into publishing that can have high impact. But I feel like this one better. This is from 2020. Why was my paper rejected without review? And I'll spend some time, take a lot of questions if you want. This is another of the biggest questions I get. Because I'm editor-in-chief, so I make that first decision. Will your paper go to an associate editor? I'll show you how that. So this, then they have other ones that were specific. Okay, certain topics I know many of you are working on probably microplastics, nanoplastics, dare I say PFAS. Recently, a major journal, not ACS, has now said they're going to reject everything on PFAS unless you can really make a case. There's just so much published. I've already heard a very novel aspect, but it's so important to explain. I'm getting ahead of myself. Explain it in the cover letter and the introduction. Why what you're doing is very novel when you're in a big topic like PFAS, microplastics. You have to differentiate your paper critically or will be rejected. So these articles are talking about, basically that topic of nanoplastics in particular, because there's so many papers. So our journal, ES&T 1. So our impact factor has slid. We were at once, I think, at around 4.9 or 5.1. The last few years, almost all the journals have went down a little. And I think this is kind of the tail end of the wave in the pandemic. Citations and papers were down. But number of citations, our time to first review decision, I'm not proud of that. That's partially me. We are improving that. So just so you know, every year in January, unfortunately, right after the new year, every editor-in-chief from ACS meets together. Last year was in Washington, D.C., which was gloomy and not very fun. This year it'll be in Lisbon, in Portugal. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't really care much for DC at the moment. So this was our editor team at the beginning of 2025. So myself as editor-in-chief, we have Ching-Hua Huang, who we were just mentioning, also from Georgia Tech, Mr. Constance. Bing Yang in Chinese Academy of Sciences, Jörg Gravis at Technical University of Munich. A new associate editor, the first from Mexico, Ruben, the biotechnology expert. Judy Zhang, Case Western, and one of my former postdocs has now been promoted. He did a good job. He's now an associate editor, Jun Chua in Singapore. But we try to have a diverse group, and we are looking to recruit new AEs. So if you have recommendations, we're always looking. But this is a good slide to jump in and show. At the time I made this PowerPoint, June was a topic editor. So this is usually how it goes. I'll talk about the editorial advisory board next. We look at who's doing really well, their peer reviews, their turnaround time, and we will often go to them and say, would you like to be promoted? Editor advisory board does not have compensation, but it's a good way to get your foot in, a very good way. And then a topic editor, we give them a very small portfolio, maybe 50 papers a year, maybe 25 in the case we have a new one. Andrea Silverman at NYU, she's just coming on board as a topic editor. And then if your performance is well and you can handle the workload, and it is a big workload, it really is, then you can get promoted, offered associate editor. Someday, I look forward to not being editor-in-chief, because it is too much work. I also will say at this point, here I say in the video, this is not something we do for money. The compensation here, I could probably make more money working at 7-Eleven. I put in the hours because it just doesn't pay that much. So we do it as a service. I do it often because I like this international network. And when the world feels really depressing, politics, I can get away and meet people around the world and common interests. So that's what I do. Definitely not the money. It's a loser when it comes to podcasts. At least with that ACS. I think Elsevier paid us a lot more. So our EAP. Now, I showed this slide and I put myself in danger because last time, who pointed out, we don't have good representation in Africa. We don't have great representation in India or even in Russia or the Russian states. That's not by intention. If we get people who are really interested, and usually these are coming by people volunteering. So at the beginning, each editor, we say, okay, I know these great people. Let's try to get them on our board. And we ask them to peer review 10 papers a year. Now that's not a fixed number, right? If they do 5 and they do great, that's good. If they do 15 or 20, we may say, hey, you want to come on and become a topic editor or associate editor. They are not compensated, but we do watch their performance. I'm going to tell all of you this if you don't know this. When you start peer reviewing, at least in my experience, both Elsevier and ACS, we keep a scorecard for you your whole career. Unless you somehow change your name change or somebody we can't find that continuity, we have a score I can pull up for every person that peer reviews in our journal. I can see if they were on time. Did they accept the paper? Did they give us a good review? So you get a score. That score continues to run. And if you accept the paper for peer review, trust me, if you accept to do it, you really should do it. And I'll show this later, but I'm on a roll. It's ad libbing. If you accept it and say something happens in your life, a great thing or a tragic thing, just write to the journal, whoever the publisher may be, and say something happened in my life. I cannot get this done. A big assignment, a new project, that's fine. Fine. But to just accept it and never turn it in, we really don't like that. Because that makes our time longer. We now have to invite new peer reviewers, and the authors are usually delayed at least 3 weeks. So I'll show you more about that in detail. This is not a big deal, but it's just kind of funny. You know, at the beginning, our journal is only 5 years old. So we had to go 3 years to get any impact factor. And in those 3 years, our authors were mainly well-known scientists. Because to get promotion in tenure, I don't know here, but at NTU in Singapore, we had to have the journals approved by the country. Luckily, our journal was approved, probably because I was editor-in-chief, I don't know. But ES&T engineering was not. So people would submit to us and not to them. This is a political decisions that are made. But anyway, once we had an impact factor, the journal instantly jumped. And in 2024, our journal won the fastest growing journal in all of the ACS. That was cool. And even though our numbers are small, you can see that delta, that big jump. So we grew and we have continued to grow quite quickly. Our global representation, this is a little bit old now, but we have had 79 different countries submit papers to the journal. You know, it changes each year a little bit, but you can see that upward trajectory. And this is something that I really love. I love to see papers from all over the world. And I'm really impressed when they're coming from places under conflict, under high stress environments. And our journal, with my decision and my editors, we tend to try to help people who are trying to publish from underrepresented countries, geographies, etc. So that's a difference with our journal that we have made. I'll talk about that later for impact factor. I'll give you just a quick snippet of that now. If you want to make your journal's impact factor really high, it's super easy. You only take the papers from the top universities, top scientists, so to speak, and then you just publish that. And your journal impact factor will be huge. And that is not the strategy that I wanted. That's not the strategy our editors wanted either. We agreed to be a more diverse and inclusive journal rather than try to artificially manipulate the impact factor. And that's what we got. And we are proud of what we agreed. So that's kind of the general. Yes, please. Any questions? Yeah. The simplest way to explain it is basically the number of papers we publish and the number of citations that we get. And from that, you get, say, a 5. So basically 5 citations for every paper. It's not quite that simple, but that's the gist of it. Yeah, so that's how we get. So like if we publish, say, 100 papers from quote unquote famous authors, famous institutions, they will get cited. But when we start to reach out and say we see development in parts of the world that haven't published much before, those papers, sadly, often don't get as cited. But we are giving that forum and we're trying to make that so that everyone can be represented. I'll talk more about that when we talk about the scientific impact. Because the novelty piece is really difficult. If you don't have the fanciest mass spectrometer or whatever equipment, it's hard to get that novelty component. It's harder, but I'll come back to that. And any other quick questions? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the writing. And now I know Mike teaches a course on this, so I have to watch him, make sure I'm doing this right myself. You know, some of this is really obvious. I don't want to spend a lot of time. Obviously, we want to share our research vision, findings. I mean, as a student, I remember we were all students at one time, right? Even though it was a long time ago. But that drive that I'm working in the lab, not sleeping at night and working the weekends, that feeling of being a graduate student, you worked hard and you want to get your work out there. And that is key. And also now, even when I was a student, you may have requirements to publish. Tech has them, NTU, in Singapore, we had them, different ones, but still, you had to at least have your manuscript submitted to graduate with a PhD. We're talking about master's degrees now. I don't know how feasible that would be. Your career advancement. So this is what I hear a lot from my former students. Hey, that paper we published, it was cited a couple hundred times. It helped me get a job. It helped my employer look at my work and understand what I've done and that I'm a good writer. Because I was in charge of the environmental engineering program at Arizona. And I went out, we did a survey of all the potential employers in the Arizona area, Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff. And the number one criteria was, can that student communicate? Number one, not your calculus, not your physics, it was really about, can you communicate your work and can you sell yourself and the company or whoever to win grants, win contracts, be it academic or private sector. So it is important to be able to prove that you have writing skills. Secure funding and then collaboration. There's a lot of collaboration that happens because you publish a paper, I read it, like that's really interesting. And maybe tomorrow I'm going to give a presentation. That happened to me. I read a paper that was published by a colleague and it actually changed my research direction. This is in the last 5 years. Something I read changed what I wanted to do. So 3 common paths. I'm only going to talk about path 1. I actually have a presentation for each of the 3, but I'm only going to talk about 1. So technical manuscripts or review papers, and we are generally targeting other scientists. Not to say the media won't pick up on it, public may pick up on it, our government has picked up on some of that, so it may be read more, but generally targeting other scientists. So basically, the art of persuasion, we have a claim, so you're making a statement, like your abstract, right? Your intro, to summarize what you've done. What's the situation, what you contributed, what's the evidence from the data, and generally we want hypothesis based, not always, but generally. So when we are reasoning, we cite other people's work. I'll talk about that later. What does the raw data tell us? Can be interpreted in different ways. You can even say in your manuscript, our data could be leading to one direction or another. It's okay. I'll say it now. It's also good to publish the negative. Some of the greatest scientific findings in history by accident. So if we don't publish things that didn't work out the way we thought, we may be losing some of the best scientific discoveries of all. So statistics, et cetera, et cetera. So the way you should put this together, the authors, affiliations, the abstracts, the keynotes, or keyword, and I'll give you some examples. We have an introduction, which is very important. I can tell you, as from being an editor for over a decade, often I read the abstract, the intro, and then I read sections of the paper. As editor, I wish I could read every paper end to end, but I don't have the bandwidth. I'll be surprised if other editors can, but I admit I can. Methods and materials, we're going to talk about that. there's often a challenge in that section, section 3, that we tend to cite a paper we wrote before or someone else wrote. If you put the methods in, then maybe the plagiarism will catch it. I'll talk about that later. It's a tricky section on the methods, how to have enough, but not that too much. Results of discussion, and some journals have a conclusion. ES&T does not have a conclusion section, so you have to read the guide for authors, because if you get it wrong, even if I don't catch it, the peer reviewers often do, and they can see the format was for some other journal. Not terrible, but not as good as it could be. So, and these are some of the questions I got literally in Riga, whatever, about 3 or so weeks ago. Active versus passive voice. So you want to write generally in an active voice, the right tense of verbs, if you have present, past tense, first person, making it clear, short, declarative sentences, not to be too going on and rambling like I do when I speak, but writing, try to keep it concise and have a very clear structure. So there is a guide ACS has, again, several of these, and again, you can have a copy of the slides, that way you don't have to try to memorize findings like yours. Some of the very common mistakes, and these are things, again, a lot of this does not impact me as editor-in-chief, because I know that we can always send the manuscript out to have it improved for grammar. That's the only issue. The data is great. These things are not the most critical, but some peer reviewers can be very, very picky. Some reviewers will throw a paper back and say, look, it's written so inconcisively that I can't follow it and I don't want to read it. My time is valuable. Don't make me correct something that has so many mistakes. But the common ones, subject verb agreement, modifiers, double negatives. That's something I really get frustrated by. I find in politics they like these double negatives. I'm confused. It never will not happen ever again. And what does that mean? So try to avoid that. That's something I have to really hate. Punctuation and fragments, again, don't worry terribly about this. This is just our top ones that ACS has identified as mistakes. So again, I keep tending to show you all these different links. They do try their best to give you a lot of information. And as I said, I'm admitting even on camera, I had not looked at these until I was preparing for this kind of lecture somewhere else. I started looking at it and thought, wow, I really have a tremendous wealth of information. Beyond all these, the journal themselves will have a guide for authors. Every single ACS journal. And not all of our journals follow the same format. Especially in my case, if you submit something to ACS letters, and ACS letter says no, that's better off in ES&T air, water, ES&T itself. You have to change up your format, right? You're shrinking it, your word count down. So just watch that guide for all. It's good that you have it at least in the right format. I'll say that now, it's not here. One of the biggest questions I get for my journal is word count. Honestly, it annoys me. I don't think the word count within reason is critical. So if you're above the word count, ACS will write to me if it's accepted and say, okay, this paper is 500 words and word equivalence. It's each figure count for so many words. Doesn't bother you. 90% of the time, I say no. Paper was accepted and peer reviewed, it looks solid, let it go, because it's electronic. They're not printing it. But on the other hand, I have sometimes peer reviewers come back and say, these authors, their introduction was painfully long. They only cited data from 20 years ago, none of the new stuff indents it. That's a scenario where we may say, try to be more concise and try to be more current. And especially the part about current. I think all of us myself included, we like to cite our old papers, right? And that's okay, if it's in the right context. But I suggest you don't cite papers that are 20 years or so old, just because you're trying to help somebody get their impact factor up or whatever. That can get flagged, it's not a big deal, but it's good to at least have some of the current references mixed in with the historical ones. So what about me? I've been a faculty member for 15 years, and sad to think 10 years before that, I worked for a large water agency in Las Vegas, Nevada. Even then, we were trying to publish, we created a research group. I usually focus on chemistry or analytical side, a bit on toxicology, which is actually my degree. I have to admit now, I have no engineering degree. I have a funny story about that later. And I work on water treatment and solid waste technology, but more of an applied, to be honest, than developing the novel membrane. That's not what I do. So I was editor-chief of Chemosphere for a bit more than 7 years. And then I became the founding editor for ES&T Water 5 years ago. I just wanted to say a word about these two. I don't want to belabor this, but when I was first contacted by Elsa, I was shocked. I got an email, give us a call. I was actually in Singapore. I called them, they said, you've been nominated to be the editor-in-chief of Chemosphere. Congratulations. I said, no, thank you. That's flattering, but I have no interest. You know, I don't really do much with that journal, and I'm really busy. I don't have time. I can't handle the workload. So thank you, but I'm not interested. So that went away, and I wondered, did I make the right decision? Maybe I should have done it. And Elsevier came back and said, we found a second editor-in-chief, Jacob de Boer, wonderful, wonderful person in the Netherlands. What if the two of you were co-editors? Even then, he was volume enormous. So I said, okay, I knew Jacob. I said, he's a great person. Be fun to work with him. Let's do it. And I enjoyed it. I'm doing that 7 years. But I will give you examples of what goes right, what doesn't go right, and if we have time, I'll even get into what happened to some of those journals to be delisted. ES&T Water, I also, when I was contacted, I got an email that said, would you be interested in being an editor-in-chief for ES&T? I was like, whoa. David Sedlak, all these famous people. I was like, hey, this is weird. Why me? And I told ACS, I said, you know, I don't publish in your journal anymore. You look at my CV, you'll see it. I was tired of the rejections, being honest. We kept submitting papers, we'd get back, say, 4 peer reviews, 3 said the paper's great, small thing. 1 paper said this paper is no good, and it was rejected. So I got frustrated and forget it. I'll go with, I stayed with Elsevier. Not because of Chemosphere, because I got to know the format. I got to know how it worked. Water research, Stoughton, Chemosphere. Similar formats, and I kind of knew how to write the paper. That happens a lot. And the publishers know it. Often we end up kind of sticking to a journal, I don't think because of loyalty, as much as we just know how it works. Know what it takes to get our papers in. And authors tend to stay with that publisher by and large. You'd be shocked at how much that happens. Not everyone. So anyway, they told me, look, we are creating a new journal for that reason. You are the kind of person that we want to come back because our rejection rate at ES&T is so high, and the majority of papers rejected went on to other publishers and became highly cited. Shockingly, like the numbers blew me away. And they're like, you know, we feel like something's wrong, that we should be capturing some of that material into these journals that are more specific. Because ES&T is extremely general. Policy, chemistry, toxicology. It's great. I still love the journal. But they were beginning to lose people, and it tended to be a relatively closed loop group of authors who would stick with that journal. I was not one of them. Okay. So now I still publish everywhere I can publish. We can talk about it later. Doesn't matter, yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I do like doing it. And I know it's kind of a weird obsession, but I actually enjoy when I get a new batch of papers in to look at who it is, what are they doing, and especially when they're coming from parts of the world I've never been or never heard of. It's exciting to think about these people working sometimes in areas of extreme conflict or whatnot, putting forward their best work. I find it very touching. So I really do enjoy that. I hate it when I get a plagiarized manuscript. I hate it when I get a nasty complaint. We can talk about that too. And I love being traveling around the world. That's obvious. And I'm so happy to be here again. And Rob Lynn had put up with me. He could tell stories. I hope you don't. But yeah, so I get around a lot and I do really enjoy it. And I'm going to say this now. I do encourage you as students, faculty, if you think something's wrong in the journal, maybe it's a rejection, maybe it's how long your paper is taking, I will go against my publisher to say, write to the editor. That's my opinion. If you write to the address you click on, it don't come to me. It goes to the ACS, which is fine. They will eventually forward it to me. But if you write to me directly, I can go into the system and figure out where's your paper. Even if I assigned it to a different editor, I can see everything. So I can go in there and try to get it moving without engaging the ACS. I'm not trying to bypass them. Sorry, ACS, if you're watching. It's not that. It's just that you can talk to me directly. And when we're talking, we have an open dialogue. So I like that. And in Latvia, they were shocked. We thought it would be unethical to write to the editor. Maybe other editors would say that. But me, and I believe all of our ADs, prefer that you find us at my Georgia Tech email address, or if you know my WhatsApp or you know my Gmail, it's fine. But don't be shy to reach out. But here's the key. Do it politely, even if you're really angry. This will make a big difference. You write a polite note that says, hey, my paper was rejected, say after peer review. But one or two of the reviewers, they didn't get it. It appears they may not, I wouldn't even say they are not expert, just say, I don't think they fully understood what we were trying to say. And this is what we were trying to say. Could you reconsider it? Could you go back to the reviewer? Most of the times, I will do that. Most of the time. Now, if an associate editor had a reason to reject the paper, I will reach out to them, find out what's going on, and then we make a decision. But if you go the other way and you write some hateful letter, you're never going to publish in your journal again, stop, terrible. That's not the ideal way to be convincing. And by the way, if I decide, or an editor decides to give your paper a second look, we will usually, I will expedite. In other words, you've been waiting a month, maybe 2 months, hopefully not longer. Then you've written to me, you convinced me, I will work really hard to get that thing finished. Okay. So don't be afraid to write to the editors. That's my opinion, may vary from ACS. So you'll see how the font jumps around. I'll put some of my old stuff, some of my new stuff. I don't want to read this to you. Again, I can give it to you, right? But what's the best journal? I'm going to step back a second. I'm not here to tell you that ES&T Water is your best journal for your work. You know where it should be. But my key, and I tell every one of my students and postdocs, look at the references you've cited outside of your research mentor's work, of course. But where are these papers coming from? That should kind of tell you where your paper belongs. You're citing other people's work. You're building on it. Where did they publish? At least it gives you an idea. I mentioned, looking at research or recent publications, peer-reviewed audience impact factor. I'm going to make a statement. Now, it's easy for me to say with a journal is below 5 impact factor. My opinion. If you have a listing of what journals you must publish in, then you have. But when we're splitting hairs between impact factor 5, 6, and 7, my opinion, there's no difference. There's no difference. I would go with the one I feel like my paper fits, and maybe I know the process, I know the format fits, maybe want it, etc. But I will not differentiate with my students to say, hey, this impact factor is 6 and this one's 8, you should do it to 8. I actually find that backfires a lot more than it's successful. Now, if you're talking about impact factor 8 and impact factor 50, okay, that's probably a pretty big difference, because my other appointment in Singapore was at the medical school, and they wouldn't dabble in these journals that are 5 to 10, right? I mean, they're after those 30 plus impact factor journals. So your field will dictate a lot of that impact factor. So think outside the box within the constraints of what you get published. Never, I don't see this as much now. Don't submit your paper to multiple journals. Hey, that was a trick that was happening a decade ago, and it was a bad one. People would submit their paper to say 3 journals. The first one to put it in peer review, they would cancel the other 2. At the time, it was hard to see that, but now we can see it. And we usually know because the author will write us a letter saying, oh, I decided to withdraw my paper. At that minute, your paper's flagged, and ACS will watch to see if you published it elsewhere. And if you do, there'll be a little flag on your name if you submit your next paper. So just don't bother. It makes sense in terms of you want it out fast, but just do one journal at a time. If you want it out super fast, go to a letter or X or whatever the fast dissemination is. And I already said about impact factors. So I think this is obvious, right? So you submit your paper. In this case, I'm the first one to see it. Honestly, I wish that was not the case. It used to not be the case. It used to be that your paper would be pre-screened by expert publishers to see if your paper is generally in the right scope, generally well written. I think for financial reasons, Elsevier dropped that from our journal long ago. I think some of the more prestigious, if you will, journals may still have that pre-screen. But for now, assume that the editor-in-chief will see it first. They'll make sure that you've included all the pieces that you need, but the quality, even the scope, likely will not be checked. Come to me or to the editor-in-chief. So we can reject without review. For me, that is actually quite rare. Our journal, I usually, if you're in the right scope, if your paper looks decent, I will send it to an associate editor who is an expert in that field. I admit I am not by far an expert in every field, not even close. So I look at it, format looks good, I read sections, it's reading well, it looks well constructed, and it doesn't look like it's AI. If I get to the end, and I'm watching the time I'm talking to, I would like to jump maybe to get to the AI, because that's something we are watching. And maybe we should jump about 5 minutes to make sure we cover that, because I think it's critical. So either I have reject or transfer. I meant to have a third line. Third line is I take the paper. I handle it myself. I do more than I'm supposed to because I see things in my own field. And I know that if I handle it, I know how fast or slow it'll be. So if I like it and it's my field, it's something of interest, I can take that paper as myself as the editor, invite peer review, etc. I also invite myself if I'm going to reject it for certain reasons. If I look at it, something looks wrong, I'll assign myself to it. That allows me a different menu in the software where I can put it. So second set of eyes, there's the associate editor, it can reject it as well. And in our journal, I tell the associate editor, look, right now, the number of submissions is not high enough that I need to be rejecting most of the triage. I will let you make that decision. It's your field. I'm not going to make a call. You look at it, and within reason, we try to balance it. Then peer reviewers will talk about revisions. It can be rejected after revision. I'll get into that by time. But usually, this will only happen if the paper has not been well revised. So from our journal, if you get a minor revision, chances are very high your paper will get accepted. We don't have moderate, we have minor and major. I missed moderate, I think that was good. We don't have it. If you get major revision, more times than not, I would send your paper back to the peer review, the same ones. They will come back and say, yes, these authors did great, and sometimes they'll say, these authors ignored my comments, and this is really bad. Then I have a problem, I have to make a decision, and maybe even send it a third time back. So I mentioned, how you become a reviewer. I strongly advocate for young professionals, graduate students to opt for peer review. Now that's somewhat controversial, it may sound like. Understand that we have the ability to we can ignore a review. Sometimes I get a review back that says, this paper looks great, publish it. That's not helpful. And I will just say, boom, reject it. Just say, I'm not going to use that review. And so I like it when students write, postdocs write to me and say, hey, I want to try the peer review, I want to start. And I have my own students doing peer reviews as well, not for every paper, but ones that are very aligned with their expertise. All right, a couple quick things I think are important. We get this question a lot. We request that you suggest reviewers. In this area, my opinion is Elsevier was more strict. We had trained the publishing handlers to see who did you recommend and were they from at least a few different countries. Right? I mean, we want to see diversity. We don't want to see a US author with 6 US reviewers suggested. I don't like that. I want to see some in Asia, some in Europe. I want to see a diversity, and we are an international. So we may or may not handle it. If I see you recommended 6 people with the same email address as you, I may reject your paper, or at best, I will not use any of it. So be smart about who you're going to recommend. So we may pick 1 or 2. They should be experienced. They also, I would say, maybe not always pick the number 1 or number 2 people in your field, or editors in chief of big journals. Likely they're not going to accept it. So what I like to suggest is that you think about, who did you reference? That is a good choice. And this is one of my secrets or tips. If you're suggesting somebody who you have cited, I hate to say it, they're going to have a little self-interest too, right? They're going to say, hey, my paper is being cited. That's great. As long as your data is good, that's the best person. So I strongly advocate to look at your references, pick some of the reviewers from those references as your potential reviewers. They may be quite interested in what you have. All right, I said all these things. Yeah, I don't want to. I talked. All right, I'll just say this. I think I've already said it. Whoops. Good peer reviewers are like a gift, and they're becoming rare. A good peer review, especially I think when I was younger, we would see, some of us who have been in this a while, we'll have a summary. This is what I think of that paper. The last sentence is usually would be good to publish after a lot of revision or minor. Or they may say this paper does not look suitable for the journal. So these things can happen. We get multiple people look at it, and we love reviewers that give us these kind of specific, scientifically backed comments. On the other hand, like I said, reviewers that come back 2 weeks late and say this paper is terrible, don't publish it, nothing else, that's horrible. And I give them the lowest score I could possibly give. And that record will continue to track with that on. They don't justify it. Personal attacks, if I see that, that really makes me angry. I generally don't reply. I forward it to ACS and tell them you should look at this. Yeah, sure. I think after this one, I'm going to jump straight to that. It's so critical. And I'll just start by AI should not be used as drug peer review. That is an intellectual property violation. So it's actually illegal to do, because I'll get into it, but the AI, if you have a really novel piece of work, the AI would struggle theoretically to be able to identify whether this is good work or bad, because you have new data that's not been trained. Of course, there's generative AI, it's getting smarter and smarter, but that's a big no-no. Like I've taught that. And I actually, in Latvia, some of the audience told me, look, I've got a peer review back that's clearly generated by AI. If you see that, you should write the editor meeting. Say, hey, that peer review looks like ChatGPT, not a human. And if we see that, we will contact that peer reviewer and we will give them a bad one. However, this is changing so rapidly. So there are areas we can use AI ethically, but not for peer review. Because now you've taken somebody's confidential data, you uploaded it into a cloud, you've literally given away their copy. So I'm not saying anyone here would do that, but it does happen. And at first, it was hard for me to actually detect it, but in time, we get better and better right at catching things that were written by AI. But my son's a college student, he's telling me, well, there's other ways, copy and paste it, but it's for 5 different AI. I hate to even think of it. We do not tolerate the peer review stuff. I think after this, we're out of time. Okay, I already said all that. Again, I already said this. Rejection. Just to say, just remember, don't get angry when your papers reject. When I was editor-in-chief of Chemosphere, my group submitted papers to Chemosphere. A different editor would handle it. They should. It was one of the problems that happened. But sometimes the editors take my papers out of scope, right? And the editor-in-chief, my paper out of scope. Of course, I was like, but it's legit. So rejection happens. Best not to get angry unless you think truly there was some kind of mistake, ethical violation. Then write to the editor is my suggestion. If you write to the publisher, that's totally fine, but it will take more days. It'll take time for them to get it, forward it to me. It goes to an email account I can only see through their server. If you write to me at Georgia Tech, it should pop up quickly and I will hopefully get you. Transfer offers, I just want to make a quick comment on that. The transfer offers is another topic I'm asked about usually every single one of these meetings. I have mixed emotions. I like transfers from ES&T. I do. I got one from a very famous person. I'm positive you know, I know we've been in the same room with this person, very famous author. And their paper was rejected after peer review from ES&T. They wrote to me that, you know, I'm going to accept the transfer offer and how it goes. And that paper is super good. In fact, there are times when the peer review says it's kind of out of the scope, maybe it's not as novel as ES&T or Letter wants. There have been times I would read the peer review and publish it without further review. Because it fits my journal, and the peer reviews were positive, just saying, hey, it doesn't fit quite well in ES&T or Letter. So the transfer offers can be good. What I don't like, one bit. Every journal publisher now has some catch-all journal. Not that they're bad journals. We have ACS Omega. I don't even know the impact factor. I know the editor-in-chief. But that is the journal. If I can't think of where else to transfer, and it's not a bad article. It's bad, I just reject it. No recommendation. But if it's something out of my field or whatnot, I can send it to other journals. So just watch it, because the argument I get is that the open access catch-all journals, you have to pay to publish. For Elsevier, I believe it's Helium. For ACS, it's Omega. I don't know which other journals are out there. But I also want to make a quick statement of something I learned at the International Ozone Association. Just talk about this. I met an author. I've known him since he was a student. He said, I had a paper in Elsevier, rejected, pushed it, Helium, I published it, and it's been cited over 8,000 times. I said, wait a minute, 8,000 citations. Yep. How old is it? 3 years old. Wow, I've never had one paper from 2000, I think, 20, 30 years ago. And sure enough, I looked at his paper and I said, wow, too bad it didn't come to ES&T water, right? So there are two sides of the coin. Just look at where you're being offered the transfer. If you accept it, it can make the process fast. But if you don't want to pay open access fees, be careful. Yeah. All right. Any questions? I'm gonna skip all the way down. I'll look up in a minute. I had a lot of stuff here. I know. I thought I said I was putting together something. All right, let me jump to that. Any questions so far? I'll wrap up on AI, and then before that, all that stuff I paged down is sort of like tips for writing, how to make good figures. You're better off to get a copy of the PowerPoint. Look at it. Be bored for me anyway. So any questions so far? Okay, let's wrap up with this mountain, the elephant in the room, so to speak, AI. So first and foremost, as an older, mature gentleman, I'm like naive to AI, right? Like I have to ask my students for help. And you are saying, oh, it can help you get organized. You know I can use that, right? It can go through your calendar, do all these things. I don't know how to do it. So I entered into this a bit naive. And I've been going to these editor-chief meetings for ACS now, my 5th one. The first 3 or 4, I didn't hear much about AI. Last year, the whole meeting was about AI. And I was enlightened in a depressed sort of way. Like, wow. So this is from ACS. I'm so happy they just provided this to me yesterday. Asked about it. This is Latvia. I had tons of questions. I wasn't quite sure of the official position. We did Portugal in January. I bet we spend the whole week on this topic again. So, ways to use it to idea generation. This is not my bullets. This is ACS. So I was kind of surprised. I can get a new idea from AI. That's pretty interesting. Maybe so. To improve the language, absolutely. That one I think is pretty clear. If you have an AI system that somehow you can tell it, please help me correct the grammar. I want it in British English, US English, I want it in Mandarin, Spanish, whatever. I mean, AI has the power. And that is a property of state. Recommend paper power. I've never heard of it or used it, to be honest. And to check you're following the criteria. Word counts, self-citation, the things that we try to look for. Soon there won't be any editors, right? I'm going to be sad. I'll be stuck at home with nowhere to go because AI will replace me. I'm just ready. Please declare you used it. I love this. I absolutely commend. Often I've been writing emails to the authors from my personal Georgia Tech account. Thank you so much for being honest and telling us that you did use AI. That is smart because a lot of us will be like me and say, you're honest, that is awesome. And if it looks like, what you did with AI is within the guidelines, I also thank you. So ethical issues, of course, we have to worry about plagiarism. Paper mills seem to be on a downturn now, but that was a huge problem 5 to 10 years ago. Is it even real? Has the authorship been for sale? Wow, I wish I had known people would pay for authorship. I didn't know about that. All jokes aside, the peer review, that's the one. That's the one of all the AI stuff. Do not load, do not accept a peer review, send it to AI, and then copy and paste it back. Is that, if they catch it, it's violating copyright. Duplicate submissions, do you declare it? Citation cartels, self-citation excessive. And that's a tricky one, right? Because we all like to see our work cited. But now, I'm sure here, I know at NTU in Singapore, when they look at your tenure, they subtract away any self-citation. So it's sometimes not very good. This one has caught some very famous people. They've used the same image in 2 different papers. A very, very famous case from Berkeley. I don't know if you know about it, but it long ago. But an author used the exact same image, but had 2 different conclusions about the image. That was caught. That faculty member was terminated, and I don't know where they ended up. A rising star, and that rising star became a shooting star, and they were found that they had been found to be falsifying information was actually impacting policy since then. So be careful how you do this. I already said that, I think we were running out of time on the meeting. And this one, I wrote to ACS yesterday, I promise. I said, hey, what does this mean? I'm not quite sure what this means. AI can be used to identify new researchers and peer review. I guess if you have to suggest 6 reviewers, maybe there's a way to ask an AI system who are the top people in this field. I don't really know what they meant. I did not get an answer. I must have stumped them. I wrote that because they had 24-hour clock. So again, this is again not my work, but just showing directly from the ACS. Oh, I just realized it says privileged and confidential. Confidential except for one unit. There's a more human input needed, of course, when you get out to peer review and AI input more useful, experimentation, says writing, which journal to spend. So in my opinion, it's still a little bit blurry. We are still figuring out where the boundary conditions will be. But for now, the good news is humans still have some value to the process. Happy to. There have been things published. I'll say a couple words about this funny story. But these are 2 things that came out of ACS journals about using ChatGPT. For a while, 5 years or so ago, I was getting a group of authors who kept writing papers about how does ChatGPT respond to certain questions. And it looked cool. I didn't know ChatGPT, I'm learning, I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. But those same authors were submitting to papers all over the planet in every field, from water to energy to material science. They were doing the same thing, they're putting different keywords into ChatGPT. So quickly it became not so interesting, and we ended up saying, don't submit any more papers on that theme, just putting in some keywords showing how ChatGPT reacts. 5 years ago, it started with the best intentions. So I rushed through that in an hour, but that's probably more than enough. Are there any questions? I don't know how much time we have. Any questions about what I flew through? Thanks. All right.
So I think we still have like 20 to 30 minutes of time for question and answers. So any questions? Yes, please.
And let's do it. That's the conversation.
You were like planted in the audience, right? That is something I skipped through. I love how you're asking about the cover letter, yes? Okay. I usually spend a good bit of time on it. To me, the cover letter is one of the most important aspects of a paper for me as an editor. We had a meeting at one of the gigantic conferences in China where editors had different opinions. For me, I always tell all of you that cover letter is so important because it gives you the chance to talk to me and then to an associate editor. Peer reviewers won't see it. Okay? So here's my advice, especially if you're trying to show why is your paper novel. A good idea. I recommend this every single time. Use that cover letter to say, I think my paper should be an ES&T water. Make sure you have the right journal name. Some people recycle it. I see broad journal name. That's like a showstopper. I'm a little irritated, right? Okay, you didn't even take the time to edit it from a competitor journal. So say I did my paper, the authors believe our paper could be in your journal because of these reasons. And you can even bullet point. Water can cover this topic. Like here's a trick. Here's a tip. A tip is, I do this every time. I suggest that you actually cite other work that's been published in that journal. ES&T water research, don't matter. Because I'm reading this, I read every cover letter. And I see, okay, now I understand why you think it's novel. Because maybe it's on something I don't work on. Some new anammox reactor. I have no idea. I'm gonna send it to an AE if I send it at all. You can sit there and you can write and explain why you think it's important for the journal. Then, if you really want to be compelling, say, actually, your journal has published these other articles that I found inspiring, that I'm adding to, that my data fits into something you've already published. If you do that, it's hard for me to reject the paper. It's hard because now I'm like, okay, they make a good point. This has already been published in my journal, and their papers adding to that knowledge or showing a different point of view or whatever it may be. But it's psychological warfare to me, because I'm like, hey, how do I reject it under those circumstances? So that's a tip. But I think the cover letter is critically important. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, I don't care about the word count and all the authors are certified. Yeah, maybe ACS says it should be there, then it should be. I don't study it. I assume it's going to be there. But when you write that short, succinct paragraph explaining why your paper should be in our journal, why you wanted it to be in ours, even if you're faking and pretending, it makes me feel warm inside. Like, wow, they really care about my. And to say these other papers published there, can even say I've peer reviewed for your journal, I know the journal, and that therefore I feel that it's a really good thing. That's not just for ES&T water, I think for any journal, you will get to the editor if they read the cover. And I do, and I advocate my associators. So I'm glad you asked. I think it's super important for us. Good question. Any other? Oh, yes.
For example, you can then to publish to the some good and some of the journals, local journals actually they publish some novel and is it possible like good journal like you could reach out that some of the not because in my opinion why we keep as lecturer maybe we keep publishing we keep do research but we don't have some funds to publish. But I also see in some good journal may not publishing maybe a real future is first we don't have funding and then because we have most I don't know how to say we keep doing research but we don't have time also to publish. Well now you as an editor maybe some of that that experience could affect also you work as an editor. Maybe you could say some.
Thank you. In fact, I wanted to, I think at the beginning, I tried to say that, but then I skipped, like I'm rambling like usual. I just had a big copy, which is really nice. Thanks. But okay, so our journal intentionally are trying to find authors from a variety of geographies, including Indonesia. We published a special issue on Southeast Asia, but let me jump to your question. So I always feel like it's a bit unfair. I work mainly in environmental monitoring, and I have the money maybe Singapore. I could buy the most expensive mass spectrometer nobody else has. And I say, hey, this is the first ever because I'm using some tool that costs millions of USD that maybe another country can't afford. I really do not think publishing should be that. So here's my key. I'll jump to what I recommend. For our journal, I think for most, the key is to put your work into context geographically. And I have that in my PowerPoint, so if you get a copy, you'll actually see this. Then I'll give you a quick example. I had an example of biochar. Biochar is awesome. I work on biochar. I'm doing work in Mexico on biochar. But to try to publish a paper on biochar is becoming difficult. because we are inundated every day. We get biochar papers, mostly with a dye. I use methylene blue and this banana peel biochar. I got these great reactions. I added base to it and I got better reactions. That it could be very good science for your geography, but that's the key to differentiate. So what I like to see, the best is if you have scale up data beyond the lab. That's not always possible, but if it's such an awesome idea, and this is just one biochar, then let's see where an industry is beginning to adapt it, where you have actual data from real water with real dyes, and you're showing that it's important. But this is where the cover letter comes in. Our country, my geography, we have a real problem with textile dye. Therefore, and because of cost restraints applying Calgon or Norid or whatever GAC, we are looking at a locally sourced biochar that's more environmentally sustainable. You see what I mean? You got to draw the story that shows that it's important to your geography. But when I look at it, I'm not like, okay, another biochar methyl blue. Because I have so many of them, I can't tell which ones are valuable and which ones are just a bit repetitive. So it is difficult, but my recommendation is to try to frame it in the cover letter and the introduction of why it's important for where you're from, or it could be where some other geography. But to just say, hey, we have this new biochar, it's super awesome for dyes. I have to admit, that's tough to get published. PFAS data is getting harder too, because it's so hard. You have to convince the editor of why it's important to you. So I think if you can make that compelling story in the cover letter and in the intro, you've gotten past that first marker for Arthur. And so I guess that's my hint, right? Because not everyone's going to have LC10, the mass spectrometry measuring nanograms per liter or whatever. We realize that. So good work can come in all forms. It just has to show why it was important, and ideally that someone's going to adapt it, raise the TRL, and get it into commercial. So often on those papers, I write back and say, look, this fundamental material maybe is not a good fit for us. Maybe it's better in material science journal, but when you've pilot tested it, demonstrated tested it, come back to our journal. We like applied research. So I hope that helps a little bit. I don't want to keep belaboring, but it is a challenge, and we are trying, our journal is intentionally trying to overcome that barrier. And soon we're going to try to go to Africa, we did South Asia, and hopefully eventually get the whole world covered. So we see regional issues important to the local environment. That makes sense. It's a great question. Yes.
President, thank you for your talk, and I feel really comforting because you said you get rejected, and that's right. So I always feel upset when you get, and you encourage us to, sometimes we feel unfair, we can directly write to the editor. But I'm just curious, have you ever write those kind of letter to the editor and explain that you think the reviewer's comments not fair? Have you ever done that? Because you already published over 300 publications, and have you ever tried that, or what's the percentage you pay your
That's a good question. Spot. So the answer is yes, I have. History, I don't think it's running mostly myself, but it has happened. And I can tell you both stories very good. When I've done this successfully and when I regret not doing it. Those are the two conditions. I don't remember ever writing an editor that said forget it. But how I actually got into academia whatsoever, not today, was because I wrote a letter to an editor, an associate editor of ES&T. She was wonderful. She wrote back to me, we had a phone call. Then she said, hey, you should go into academics. So she helped my life or ruined my life. I'm trying to figure that out. Seriously. So I've done this. That being her and said, look, I don't understand. I have 3 positive reviews. I can deal with everything in them. One reviewer said, hey, this work's already been done in Europe, and therefore your data is not of interest and it's old and not novel. So those kind of things happen. I have had success in at least having the editor go back, maybe inform the reviewer and see if they can get another opinion. Or even exclude that reviewer because we made a compelling case. Now, ignoring a reviewer is a dangerous position for me to be in. What if that reviewer happens to be one of our most vibrant publishing, and I ignore their review and I publish it, and they see that. So I at least need to communicate it back. So I've had success where I regret not it was when I was really young. Right. And I was just coming out of my PhD and I was full of power and I thought I knew everything and I got some negative reviews from ES&T and I got angry and I never published it. In fact, I turned it into a whole chapter which has never been cited by anyone but me. Then I can tell you another author 2 years ago published something very similar. And it became one of the most widely cited papers in that period of time. And so I have always regretted my decision to get angry and not revision. I have students who do that too. They get back, kind of a hard peer review and they just don't want to see the paper again. Especially if they met their graduation requirements, they went on to get it. I don't want anything to do. So I've had both cases, but I think more times than not, our journal, it's kind of small, right? When I see it, as long as the case is compelling. Because one thing I should add, there's a section where the peer reviewers can add comments that you will not see, right? There's a whole section for the editor's eyes only. And they may have a legitimate issue. They may point out something or provide me comments that you will never see. And I have to determine if that's real or not. That is confidential to me. So sometimes the authors don't understand because they don't see what else has been said in private. But I still advocate for if you really have compelling reasons, right? The word polite is critical. No matter how angry you are, diffuse it, have a glass of water, get some air, then write a polite, scientifically solid response.
Or maybe they need to some more time. I've actually one question. Well, thank you for sharing with the insight on ES&T water. I think we also publish in ES&T, but in the last few years, I feel that ES&T is ES, not T. ES material in the accounting. So I'm glad to hear that you take more like in practical side, the technology side of this the aspect. Could you elaborate more about that part?
Yeah, so I can see if I'm catching it right, is when the journal being formed, they formed like a focus group of our top publishers in ES&T.
Yeah.
And a lot of what they said was we can never get pilot studies published, not get case study published. And I thought immediately, because I also worked as a practitioner for a big organization, those papers were the most valuable. Some new membrane that may or may not ever be commercialized. That's super good science, it's very interesting, but it doesn't move the needle as much perhaps. Fundamental work versus the plot. That's the first part of what I was going to say. The second part is that in general, I think ES&T has really struggled with the volume that's coming in, right? And sometimes, back to our group, sometimes I don't have an editor. I'll give you an example. I got some really good papers on I guess I'd call it hydraulics and ways to slow water down. It's coming down mountain and canal with different weir structures, all calculus-based physics. I have nobody. I have no editor I'm aware of can handle that paper. I've had to go back to the office and say, yes, this deserves in our scope, but I don't have an editor who has the expertise. And now maybe I'll add. We struggled a little bit in the knowledge get into it. So I don't know about ES&T, but for our journal, there are times where the paper is, I just don't have anyone to match it to. Another thing that can happen is different than your question. Sometimes I send it out to say 20 peer reviewers and nobody agrees. Then at some point I will even write to the office and say, hey, I'm going to have to invite more people, your paper will be delayed. I don't blame you if you want to pull it. And go to a different journal. We can't find any to peer review. But that's aside from your question. The fundamental, I think, first applied is more of your question. Yeah, so that was from the beginning, one of the things that I was informed by this expert panel that ACS created. The R journal should be an outlet. Honestly, we still don't get enough of it. I would love, especially for academics or researchers, to say, hey, I published this paper in ES&T, water research, nature, whatever, this new material, new memory. This is the first pilot data that's ever been done in real water, like Europe monitoring, how it performed. We would take that paper, really try to get it published. Because that data will be used by other water agencies. That will actually help commercialization and help it get out. So we like them. But yeah, ES&T maybe not so much. Yeah.
One more
Yeah, yeah,
question.
sure.
You mentioned that, so when you were young and then you get angry when but actually I have one manuscript. I wrote that about 10 years ago, and I have tried to submit that to the ES&T and water research. They all get review process, but they get rejected. But my data is 10 years old. So, do you think should I still submit that manuscript to somewhere, or because the data is 10 years old?
It's not quite open. I've been on a particular student heavily, I think it's really good work. And I feel like it's losing some value, so maybe analogous to your situation. I think it really depends on you. You're an expert in your field. You think that paper has relevance. It's what really send it to us. And I don't think it matters if the data is 10 years old, as long as the relevance is still there. And maybe you're citing some of the newer work they have been published since then. Say, yes, this is an emerging field. I don't even know that you need to say what the data is unless it's maybe a monitoring system.
Because we monitor that, the sample, we monitor the whole region. Our sample that in 2016. So it's 10 years old, data, but it's still, I still think, the idea has not been recognized at this point. So, but the data is really old, and we did 1 year one.
So my suggestion, going back to the cover letter, for our external, I would suggest you say it upfront in the cover letter what you just told. Yeah, this data was older, we didn't get a chance to have it published or whatever the story may be, but it's still, we believe it has relevance for people. And in fact, there have been other papers that, our data could contribute to that have been published, whatever. As long as you make that in the cover letter, at least should get the editor to make that as fast. So they don't just see, okay, this is an old data set, I don't know why or why you think it's relevant. It's critical to get that up front and also a bit into the introduction. To frame it. Because there are some historical studies that will be very valuable, especially as we're watching things change. Could be, I won't go, but the emerging contaminant of your favorite flavor. There's data now, but we have data from 10 years ago that shows the trend looks like it's improved. So getting whatever, put it into a frame. It's fine.
Think about this.
Oh, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome. Actually, I have questions about that. Such a small place. Small. Yeah, but because I'm doing something study audience. So I always asked about Snyder data. Maybe I could take 10 years data. Keep on monitoring 10 years data, then I will got a wide range of time, change time variations. But I don't have such planning actually. So maybe I just do some case study in several sample stations that I try to compare with the. Sometimes if I'm lucky, I have collaboration with Japan or someplace, but most of the time I will be asked, is that important in your place? you've got to normalize your data, try to normalize your data and make this data, make this space suitable for all the cases around the world. So is that, just like say, we have to identify some issues in our own place.
Yeah.
But sometimes I will be asked if that's important to the rest of the people.
Yeah, so
That's my question.
no, I understand where you're coming from. We had a paper like that in Singapore, just measured byproducts. We only measured them in our tiny little island, in our case, really small. So I think it's all about framing. I still think in terms of like the editor, the peer reviewers, they may come back and we'll have to make that decision. But if you frame it from the beginning, it's important to you where you see it fitting, I think it's perfectly fine. In fact, if you said something like, never before has these kind of data been assembled for Taiwan, or even a smaller part, and this will help inform studies in the future. There are a lot of studies like that published. I know our journal in particular, we did our special issues of Southeast Asia. We had river systems that had no data ever before published. When I saw that, I thought that will be cited a lot by every other scientist working, even if it is just one country or one part of the world. I don't see it that way looking back. It seems weird to me to say, hey, I only have data from Singapore, and therefore I should have covered the whole world, but that's not really feasible. But I still believe it comes back to context, how you frame it. And maybe you say, okay, our situation, my areas, the data were very different from what we've seen in the rest of the world if you need. Or maybe it's the same, there's a difference. All of that I think contributes, but I think in terms of getting past the editors, it comes down to how you're going to frame it. Yeah, because that's the whole paper I'm talking about that I got rejected in 1990 on pharmaceuticals in US rivers. I regret my decision, pull it back, turn it into a book chapter, and it was ever written. Except for me and my students.
It's true. This have an experience. And when I rejected by JHS, and they just say, what's important in your case to the role, and I just modify it. In my case, I had one son, Tarian effect or something, and then I could set several different ways in the world, and I got 7.
I mean, again, it depends on how it's written. To me, it's not appropriate part. Because a lot of times if I'm looking at sites called novel measurements, it would be cool for me to see different pieces of the world so I can frame my work and say, okay, you found this part of the world, something different here, this is kind of where our study building upon that or informing of future models. It's going to be different with different editors. That's the catch to my caveat from the beginning. I'm saying what we do. Yeah. So the best we can do to frame it is what's critical. And Harler is a big spot.
I have one more. Scope and scope of ES&T water. And so the one of those to publish normal and high impact. And I think normal and high impact also the goal of many others. So I want to add, what do you think research is with normal and high impact?
That's the top one. I'm literally being very open about thinking of what I'm saying. I mean, that's what the 3 journals all of ES&T was to capture the things that they said are not novel. But as I said, novelty is framed differently in different places. Economics, there's a lot of things that factor in what's novel in your community. So some of the top journals, if that's the right word, they may be looking for something completely new that could be potentially transformed. How do you define that? I'm not even going to try. I mean, I have ACS's language in the slides I went with. For me, it's different. I want to see you tell me why it's novel and why it's science. And I do think it can be geographically, I believe, strong. Like, maybe PFAS analyses have never been done in this area. It's important industry, I mean, I'm just making this. I mean, that paper to me is novel. It's not novel because you better be boss, but it's novel because you did it in an area that's never been done before. And you had a good reason to worry about the communities on that. So novelty comes in all forms. I think it's more about justification. Now, high impact is actually tricky. Because for high impact, we're basically thinking could be the metrics, social media now, that's kind of new to me, all the metrics and whatnot. But mainly, historically, it's citation. And we do. I publish a paper that nobody cites, my impact factor in my journal will decrease. Because I need those citations per article. So we think about it, but honestly, our journal, I don't think that much about it. I think about the authors, giving them a platform. It looks like something that's impactful to their community, and they justify it. I'm okay if it's not cited that much. Because I always think somebody will eventually have to read this first of its kind monitoring study and build upon it, and the citations will flow naturally. This paper that I pulled out and put in the book chapter, actually, if I had left it and done it in paper, I probably would have been cited a lot, I think, based on the way the future. So each journal is going to be different, and the bar will set a different way. And for us, it's up to the author to convince us of why it's novel or even novel to your area, or why it could lead to something high impact, which could be a change in policy. It may not be citations, it could be something different. But just explain, again, I hate to pick on dyes and biochar, but if you just say, hey, I got this new biochar from a plant in my backyard and it methylene blue really awesomely. That's tricky, right? I'm thinking, okay, who's going to use that thing? Where's that going to end up? That one is tricky, but if you tell me there's this waste stream in my country, in my community, that's currently being discharged to the ocean and causing damage, we're gonna take that and create something to fix a problem with an industry in the area. And we tried it with real water. To me, that's high. That could change the way people are doing water treatment, even if it is just in one geography. I hope that helps. I can't speak for ES&T because too many of my peers. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's about time. We have a very wonderful presentation and question and answers from Professor Snyder. So please join me to thank Professor Snyder again. That question you can write to him, okay?
When I'm not traveling, I'm in the building here. There's our campus behind us, so if you would let us. Please let us know, get by. Oh, and I was told, this is embarrassing, I admit. I was told that the ACS National Spring Meeting will be in Atlanta.
Yes.
I didn't know that. I didn't remember it. Probably the right.
22nd to 26th.
So if you're coming, write me a note, come see our campus. Our campus is right in the city. You can't miss it. All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's a little different from that.
Much better.